Hi friends, this week we have been discussing about the various governance practices which are adopted in India, and primarily so far we discuss what were the ancient practices of water governance, then some of the key features of water governance in the pre-independence India colonial phase, and how majority of those practices has been adopted even post independence. We did talk about our evolution of some of the major water policies. Okay. The three major policies we have, the latest one being in 2010. In this session we will continue the discussions, and we are specifically going to talk about some of the water programs and policies which has been adopted at different stages. Okay. The water program and policies in fact can be divided in various zones. Okay. We can have the water supply and sanitation sector. So, what are the various programs and government policies in water supply and sanitation sector? Then there are irrigation sector, different irrigation schemes, industrial sector. Industrial sector, very little work is done particularly on a policy level. Then the management of surface water, groundwater, or the overall environmental management, the policies or the programs that take care of the environmental management, which again water is one of the prime component of the environment. So, this way we have variety of approaches to look at. Let us first start with the water supply programs and policies. Okay. Particularly the water supply will include sanitation as well over. So, how they have evolved from post independence phase, and what is the status at present, okay, or close to the present. So, the environmental hygiene committee was in 1949 recommended the provision of safe drinking water to over 90% of India population in coming 40 years. So, that was the first target set in around 1950, close to 1950, that in next 40 years. So, by 1990 we should have had 90% of the coverage for safe drinking water supply. Of course, that has not been met. The Constitution of India, when adopted in 1950, gave ownership of all water resources to the government, specifically to the state government, okay, specifying it as a state subject. Then from 1951 onwards we had 5-year plans. Okay. Several 5-year plans have come. Majority of them had some discussion onto the water policies as well. The most of them were concentrated to the enhancing the coverage area, enhancing the quality of supply, integrating the poors into the supply. As back as in the first 5-year plan, which was for 1951 to 56, the water supply and sanitation was added to the national agenda, with sanitation first time mentioned under water supply. Okay. Then in 1954 the National Water Supply and Sanitation Program was launched as a part of health plan. Okay. In second 5-year plan, funding was provided to public health engineering departments, okay, which basically takes care of the water supply and sewerage management, particularly in the urban areas or towns. So, the provisions for funding for these PHGDs were made in the second 5-year plan for water supply and sanitation facilities. Subsequently, in the third 5-year plan from 1961 to 66, the villages without drinking water sources within appropriate distance or of appropriate quality were identified. So, this plan focused on to identifying the problematic situations, or you can call that as a problem villages, where the drinking water sources or the drinking water sources were not in the appropriate distance. So, either they were too far, I think 1.6 kilometer was the cutoff which was taken, 1.5 or 1.6 kilometer, something like that. And it was also considered the villages which had, although they had drinking water sources, but the drinking water sources were of very poor quality. So, the contamination with arsenic, fluoride or some other toxic elements. So, those water sources which were contaminated with these, when they were the only available water sources for the villagers to use. So, those kind of villages were also identified and were categorized. It was aimed that these kind of villages will be identified and will be categorized as problem villages. Then states were given the financial authority to sanction rural water supply schemes, which were extended to include the population units of less than 20,000 in 1968. So, this power has moved to the states, that from 1968, or the law says that the state can sanction the rural water supply schemes or rural water supply projects for regions with population less than 20,000, and the financial supports will be provided accordingly for all such projects. Priority was given to the villages with acute scarcity of drinking water. So, where there was complete lack of water supply or complete lack of drinking water sources, so they were given the first priority. Then National Rural Drinking Water Supply Program was launched in 1969 with technical support from UNICEF, okay, and around rupees 255 crore of the order of that were spent in the program, with 1.2 million bore wells were dug and 17,000 piped water supply schemes were provided in the India back in 1969. One of the major developments was in the form of setting up of Central Groundwater Board, CGWB, which was set up in 1971 to look after the groundwater resources. Okay. The Accelerated Rural Water Supply Program, which were acronymed as ARWSP, was launched again by Government of India in 1972-73, and the idea was to assist the various union territories and states for accelerating their coverage of drinking water supply. So, as many percentage of population could be covered under this program, that was the basic idea, and that is why it was named as Accelerated Rural Water Supply Program. This program targeted all rural habitation with population of 100 and above for minimum 40 liters per capita per day of supply of safe drinking water through either boreholes or hand pumps, okay, or even piped water supply. Now, in 1975, around 2-3 years later, this program was replaced by 20-point Millennium Need Program, okay, which aimed at full coverage of population with safe drinking water. So, in earlier one there was some criteria that particularly the rural habitations will be focused, which are having population of 100 and above, that way, but the Millennium Need Program aimed a full coverage for the entire population with the safe drinking water. However, this like the earlier program ARWSP were reintroduced back in 77-78 with provisions of funds from states through this under this Millennium Need Program. In between, quite a few 5-year plans came, and more or less all of them stressed onto the need of drinking water sources or drinking water availability for the entire population. However, it was just restating this similar thing again and again. The development of course has taken place, but the target, the set goals were still far off. In the 6th 5-year plan, again importance was given to the water supply sector in keeping with the UN declaration of March 1977 about the International Decade of Drinking Water Supply and Sanitation. So, the United Nations declared this International Decade of Drinking Water Supply and Sanitation from 1981 to 90. So, these 10 years were declared for the purpose, and India also aligned their goal to like as a party to this mission. A national level apex committee was set up in 1981 to frame the policies in line to the International Drinking Water Supply and Sanitation Decade, which was being observed from 81 to 90. Then rural water supply and sanitation, which was under the Ministry of Urban Affairs and Employment earlier, was transferred to the Department of Rural Development, okay, as a separate department, and this department was later on basically made separate ministry though, and this department was then under the Ministry of Agriculture in 1985. The Central Rural Sanitation Program and National Technical Mission was launched in 1986. Okay. The 1986 further there was National Drinking Water Mission, NDWM was introduced, which was later renamed as Rajiv Gandhi National Drinking Water Mission, okay, RGNDWM, in 1991. Now, this is one of the landmark missions, particularly in the drinking water assurance for the rural sector. Although still it could not meet its all target objective, but significant work related to the water supply coverage was done under this mission. In 1987, the National Water Policy was drafted for the first time. So, that was the first National Water Policy, okay, by the Ministry of Water Resources, where an emphasis was given onto the domestic water supply, protection of groundwater sources, because that was also one of the very important point. The groundwater depletion was taking place at a very rapid state by then, and water quality monitoring and mapping was another aspect which was sort of given emphasis in the National Water Policy, the first National Water Policy in 1987. Drinking water was given the first priority under this policy. Now, Accelerated Urban Water Supply Program, which was AUWSP, was launched in 1993, targeting towns having population less than 20,000 as per 1991 census, with funding model of 50-50. Okay. So, this was targeted for the population of 20,000 and over, and the funding model was that 50% would be provided by the central government and rest of the 50% would have to be borne by the state government. In 1994, Panchayati Raj institutions were assigned the responsibility of providing drinking water as per the provision of 73rd Constitutional Amendment. Now, it has basically been more the drinking water management has been more localized, was given into the hand of Panchayati Raj institutions, which was a big breakthrough which took place in 1994. Then in the 8th 5-year plan, which was from 1992 to 97, emphasis was placed on treating water as a commodity. So, from that point onwards the talks came of the looking after the financial sustainability of water system. So, treat water as a commodity, privatization of water or responsibilities of local bodies for operation and maintenance of proper linkage between water supply and sanitation, all these programs were infused in the 8th 5-year plan. Okay. The sector reform pilot project SRPP was launched in 1994 in 67 districts across the country on pilot basis. So, this was a pilot project where in 67 different districts across the country the entire reform policies were introduced. Then in 9th 5-year plan from which was from 97 to 2002, targets were set to provide 100% water supply coverage in urban and rural areas, 60% sanitation coverage in urban areas and 30% in rural areas. So, this was the coverage or the short after coverage in the 9th 5-year plan. It was targeted that the particularly for water supply perspective, whether it is urban area or rural area, the coverage should be 100%, while for sanitation purpose at least 60% of the population should be covered in the urban areas and 30% of the population, minimum 30% of the population should be covered in the rural areas for sanitation purpose. Emphasis was placed on the decentralization and privatization in the 9th 5-year plan. The Rajiv Gandhi National Drinking Water Mission program scaled up through SRPP to the whole country in the form of Swachh program in 2002. So, during the Atal Bihari Vajpayee regime, this Swachh program was massively introduced in order to make the villages independent and all fed with the proper drinking water supply sources. The management of water supply and sanitation scheme became the responsibility of Panchayati Raj institutions, so that it could be managed at a local village level, local panchayat level, okay, and with support, proper support, of course with proper support from the local government bodies. So, that was another major breakthrough which in the form of Swachh program in 2002. The national water policy was revised in 2002. So, and India committed itself to Millennium Development Goals, under which the the goals were set, and one of the goals was to ensure the basic water supply and sanitation facilities, and it was as in the Millennium Development Goals was mentioned that people without sustainable access to safe drinking water and base sanitation has to be reduced from 50% in 2015 from the level of 1990. So, whatsoever was the level in 1990 of the people with people who are not having access to the safe drinking water and sanitation facility, that has to be reduced by 50% by 2015. This Millennium Development Goal, particularly in the field of water supply, was met in India. However, the sanitation sector, there was still quite a few lapses. Okay. We have discussed this earlier. Okay. So, that way 2002 was a very prominent year in terms of the policy making related to the drinking water supply. Not only drinking water supply, in the similar time period there was another very drastic step which was introduced and was taken in the form of river interlinking project. So, the government, although the talks were from much earlier, but the Vajpayee government gave nod for the river interlinking project, and that although has not been completed till date, but that project would have been a landmark project, and in fact it is under progression even now. So, that project if completes would be a very landmark project in order to the management of flood and drought, if these river interlinking concepts were transferred to the field in proper manner. In drinking water and sanitation sector, we had the Swachh Dhara program, then national water policy was revised in 2002, and the acceptability of millennium development goals. So, all this took place in around that period, that year. Then in the 10th 5-year plan, which was again from 2002 to 2007, targets 100% water supply coverage were reaffirmed with a focus on institutional restructuring, people's participation, and also managerial improvement. So, earlier plans were mostly focusing on to the technological aspect of enhancing the supply and coverage, and financial management came in like around 8th or 9th 5-year plan. Decentralization things also came earlier. However, this 10th 5-year plan give due attention and due focus onto the governance and management of water. So, how the institutions, particularly water institutions, has to be restructured, has to be framed properly, how to increase the stakeholders participation or the people's participation in water supply and sanitation sector, okay. How we can improve the efficiency of managerial bench looking after the water supply and sanitation sector. So, all this was thought during the drafting of the 10th 5-year plan. All drinking water programs were brought under the umbrella of Rajiv Gandhi National Drinking Water Mission in 2004. Then Bharat Nirman program was introduced in 2005, which was a 5-year program to build rural infrastructure, of which drinking water supply was one of the 6 component. Okay. The pattern of funding under the Swachh Dhara scheme was changed from the earlier concept of 90% from central and 10% from the community or the Panchayati Raj institutions. That share was changed to 50-50% from center and state share in 2007. So, the local contribution, okay, or the community share, which was there at 10%, was revoked. It was revoked in a sense that it does not stop community contributing in the funds, in the form of funds, but that mandatory thing was waived off, that earlier it was mandated that 10% share has to come from the community and 90% will be provided by the central government. So, that 10% mandatory share was relaxed, and the community participation or the community share has been made voluntarily. So, if some community is willing to chip in with some funds, they were welcomed. However, if they are not willing to provide funds, or the community is not able to provide funds for the drinking water and sanitation facility, then also it was fine, as the 50% funds were promised from the central government and remaining 50% contribution has to come from the state government. In 11th 5-year plan, which was from 2007 to 12, 63 cities and close to 5100 towns were aimed to be covered under the JNNURM. The main areas of importance in the plan were to strengthen the urban legislative bodies, local bodies, which were basically municipalities, or at a smaller level it was the Panchayati Raj institutions. Okay. The other aim were to basically encourage the private sector investment in the urban infrastructure, and also to establish a more acceptable regulatory framework. So, that was emphasized in the 11th 5-year plan. Then the Department of Drinking Water Supply was renamed as the Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation in 2010 and was further upgraded as a separate Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation in 2011. So, that way our Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation is only 7-8 year old. In the 12th 5-year plan, which was from 2012 to 2017, the reform agenda was set with a focus of investment in water supply and demand management. So, you see, if you follow the basic agenda in the various 5-year plan, it has shifted from various level, it has shifted from just ensuring the coverage, just ensuring the providing the water supply by digging bore holes or providing hand pumps, or in urban setups providing the piped water supply. Earlier plans focused on to these only, but slowly there was upgradation of the issue of considering water as a commodity good, issue of privatization, the issue of governance, issue of the management, the stakeholder participation. So, they slowly keep getting emphasis, and in the 12th 5-year plan, it does not remain only till the concept of supply or coverage, there were due attention given on the demand management as well. So, how can demand be managed? Okay. Then there was again like talk about reducing the intra-city inequity. Various urban areas have great degree of inequity in the supply of drinking water. Some regions get up to 350-400 million liters per capita per day water, while some other communities in the same city may get very little water, okay, 30, 40, 50 MLD. That sort of inequity was there in the cities and across the cities also. So, this was also given attention in the 12th 5-year plan. The attention was also paid onto the quality of water supplied. So, what quality of water is being supplied, particularly through the piped water system, that was also looked upon, and a regional planning approach for provision of drinking water supply and wastewater treatment and its disposal was also considered, which was in fact necessary to meet the needs of both the rural areas as well as the urban sectors. Okay. In 2012 only we had the third revision of our national water policy, okay, which was prepared, and drinking water was given the utmost priority in that. We have already talked about the various national water policies, the 3 national water policies, okay, the latest one being 12 and the earlier one being the 2002. The Prime Minister of India launched Swachh Bharat mission on the 2nd October 2014, which was coordinated by Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation. So, it was not much, nothing much has to do with the water supply program, but major focus was given on to the sanitation aspect under the Swachh Bharat mission, and this mission particularly had 2 sub missions. So, one was named as Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin, while the other one was named as Swachh Bharat Mission Urban. So, we have Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin and Swachh Bharat Mission Urban, which jointly aim to achieve the ODF nation. ODF means open defecation free. So, there are lot of campaign from the government side onto the ODF nation, towards the ODF nation, or towards stopping the open defecation. Okay. So, this was like both this Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin and Urban together jointly aimed to achieve the ODF free status for the entire country and declare it as a Swachh Bharat by the 2nd October, which is the birth date of Mahatma Gandhi. So, by 2nd October 2019, so they took 5 years of duration for achieving the targets. It was launched on the 2nd October 2014, and the target was that by 2nd October 2019 the nation should be ODF free. This program in fact has been well on the track, and in our current age, if you see, it is one of the most talked about schemes of the government, which is the Swachh Bharat mission or Swachh Bharat scheme. And as per the record from the ministry, which are available on the website of the ministry, the sanitation coverage at the launch of Swachh Bharat mission Gramin was 38.7%, which has increased to 74.1% as on 18th of December 2017. Okay. So, we are still around a year and a half, and the target is to make a 100% ODF nation, so completely open defecation free nation, and as of the December 1917 we are at around 75%. Although it is still a great improvement, moving from close to 40% to 75%. So, 35 increasing the entire coverage for the sanitation or the toilet facilities for the nation by over 35% is still a very big achievement that way. There are various ongoing schemes by the government of India, okay, on this aspect by the mostly by the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation, some other in the collaboration with Ministry of Urban Development or other aspects also. So, of course, Swachh Bharat mission is one of the plan, then we keep having Swachhata Pakhwada. Namami Gange scheme is for the water quality improvement and in fact the holistic improvement of the river Ganga, okay. So, that is under the Namami Gange. Then we have Swachhata action plan, which sort of promotes the research and R&D work in the aspect of the cleanliness. There are river interlinking projects, okay, which is again ongoing by the government of India. There is Atal mission for regeneration of urban transformation, so which is Amrut, that also has water, particularly urban water supply as a very prime component, and of course the smart cities scheme will also have the upgradation of the urban water supply systems to smart water supply system, okay. Because in order to make a city smart, you should have various facilities in the city also smart, and in that order the conversion or the modernization of the water supply system, existing water supply system is a priority under the smart city. So, many places or we discussed earlier in the week 1 when we were discussing this status. So, we know that we lag far behind. There are very few places which are having 24/7 water supply. Most of the water supply is still in the intermittent form. There is no proper metering, there is no proper automation in the water supply system. So, for smart cities we need a smart water distribution or system as well, smart sanitary system or sanitation management system as well, and that will also be sort of this also will be required while upgrading the existing cities or towns to smart cities. So, with this we will end this session here and continue the subsequent discussion in the next session. Thank you.